All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back, or welcome for the first time if you're just joining us here at the architecture track. Very excited to have Hananiel here to talk to us about observability and Steeltoe. I'm very excited about Steeltoe. A good friend of mine helped kick this project off a few years ago, and I'm just really excited to see all of sort of that Spring goodness being brought into the .NET space. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Hananiel here to talk to us about some enhancements in Steeltoe. Have at it, my friend.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Spring One, first virtual one. And I'm so glad to be here to talk about observability enhancements in Steeltoe. So what we have today is some of the new things we are adding to Steeltoe. But first, my name is Hananiel Sarella. I'm a senior engineer with Steeltoe at VMware. And on our agenda today, we have a brief introduction to observability, a little bit of an introduction to Silto, the library, and the team, to those who are not familiar with it, and a little bit of a dive into metrics and tracing in general, and a little bit of the new goodies that got added to Steeltoe. And we'll wrap it up with a demonstration of how to integrate these things with different external systems, including Grafana, Wavefront, and so on.
Case study. I love case studies.
And after that, we'll have some time for Q&A. So let's dive in. First, what is observability? When you have a system running in production and you want to ask questions of it, like, is my app healthy? Is it running well? Why is it acting weird? Why did it crash? The tools that help you find answers to this are in general called observability. Now, an important thing about observability is that you cannot, or it's very difficult to add it after the fact. It needs to be an integral part of your system's design and engineering upfront. Now, a little bit about the company VMware and Steeltoe, which is sponsored by VMware, is that VMware has a mission of taking any app to any cloud. And Steeltoe helps with that mission, being a completely open source project, also tries to take your .NET applications into any cloud. So what is Steeltoe? So Steeltoe is a library that's been around for a while now, and it's a completely open source project. And it's built to enable .NET developers embrace best practices and build resilient systems for the cloud and build cloud native applications, essentially. So we take a leaf from the Spring Boot way of doing things. This is a quote from the Spring Boot docs, that they take an opinionated view of Spring platform. So if you've ever been a Spring developer, or meddled with Java and then thought, oh my gosh, this is so complicated, and then you switch over to Spring Boot and things are so simple, a lot of things that make sense have been chosen for you. We try to bring the same flavor to .NET applications. Now, to be certain, this is not an implementation of Spring Boot. It is a completely open source third-party Microsoft library, just like many excellent libraries out there that help make your Microsoft applications very, very easy. And when you choose a platform like TAS or any of the environments that are available, we think Steeltoe will make it very easy for you to deploy your app there. So let's talk a little bit about the latest release of Steeltoe that's just out. There's lots of goodies there. There's support for streaming now. There's some upcoming integrations that will show up with Azure Spring Cloud. There is now stuff with Kubernetes, discovery connectors, and many, many more things than we have time to mention in this talk. Big focus of the Steeltoe 3.0 release has been multi-cloud. And if you're more interested in this, please definitely take a look at State of Steeltoe 2020 by Tim Hess, another engineer on the Steeltoe team. It's an hour-long presentation. I'll go into a good bit of detail about what's new in Steeltoe and what the exciting things that are coming up. Moving on, let's dive into Steeltoe observability. When we talk about observability, many times people talk about the three pillars of observability as being logs, traces, and metrics. Sealthoe has a number of features for all of these three pillars. As far as logs, we have dynamic logging and integration with tools like Sarella. The dynamic logger is a console logger that enables you to scale up and down the verbosity of your logs at runtime without restarting your apps. And Silto brings the same functionality to Serilog to be able to use your logging management endpoint, for example, to turn your logs up and down to anywhere Serilog can export your logs. As far as tracing, Steeltoe helps you export your traces in open formats. We'll see a little bit of that up ahead. And as far as at a broad level to manage your application, Steeltoe provides management endpoints, also known as actuators in the Java world, that help you integrate with tools like Spring Boot admin, tasks, and so forth. And here's a brief, a short sample of what we provide. There's a logging, trace, metrics, and even things like thread and heap dump that allow you to examine your application memory stack and troubleshoot applications in production without, obviously having direct access to them. Finally, there's a little bit of helper functionality for Spring Boot admin server. So we have a Spring Boot admin client that makes it very easy to integrate with Spring Boot admin server. And now you can get your dashboards, management console, admin console, any cloud, anywhere you can spin up a Spring Boot admin server. And finally, we come to metrics and what's new, and this is what this talk is about. We're going to talk about observers, also known as auto collectors and exporters. And this helps still to publish its metrics into various external systems to help manage your application in the cloud. So with metrics in Sealthoe 3.0, what's new? So one of the big changes has been the move from open census to open telemetry. A brief bit of history here. Steeltoe and the lead engineer for Steeltoe, Dave Tillman, wrote the original implementation of OpenCensus.net and donated it to the Open Census Foundation. Since then, Open Census and Open Tracing have merged together to be the new standard called Open Telemetry. And so we're working closely with the Open Telemetry team and bringing some of those changes into Steeltoe, as well as providing pull requests to the Open Telemetry effort. So I encourage you to take a look at Open Telemetry project if you're interested. Lots of good information and good people in those groups there. Finally, second, we have updated to use EventCounters and EventListeners. And what are these is .NET, when it started, the .NET Core framework, it didn't have the old metrics diagnostic tools on all the platforms, but eventually they've added them. And as they've added them, we started to use them. So again, here's an example of, we have our own implementation of things. For example, IPOL diagnostic source, for example, and an implementation of it that's a Steeltoe abstraction. And we replaced with an event listener as soon as it became available. So you can always be sure that you're not going off the Microsoft Rails, and the best of what's good in Microsoft is always available to you as a Steeltoe developer or as a .NET developer using Steeltoe. Finally, we have support for Prometheus, which helps you integrate, take your metrics out to various external systems. So what are Sealthometrics observers? So one of the goals of any metrics library is one black box and white box instrumentation. As far as a black box instrumentation goes, it's auto-instrumented. There are a number of things, such as your HTTP metrics that can be traced and tracked at a framework level, and you can add your spans and traces automatically to your network traffic. And there are other things that you as a developer have to add yourself. So as far as the things that are there available automatically, we want to provide as many options as possible. This is what helps makes metrics implementation easy for you. If you depend on each individual team to implement a similar set of metrics, there's going to be a wide disparity and discrepancy in how different teams do this. And so it is good to have a good set of auto collectors. And by way of this, Sealtoe provides these out of the box, the ASP.NET Core Hosting Observer, which is what is available from the diagnostic source metrics that are then published in all of the ways that Steeltoe can export them. And so also available are GC events and even event counter events that are being produced by the .NET runtime. They become available, for example, via Prometheus now when you integrate with it. And finally, we have support for things like Hystrix metrics and Hystrix events. So still, Hystrix as a project on the Java side has gone into maintenance mode, even though the dashboards are still available. And we, on the Microsoft side, we are continuing to support, on the Steeltoe side, we're continuing to support Hystrix Circuit Breaker. And to enable customers to still create dashboards with the new tooling that's available, we've added a Hystrix event source that, when subscribed to, produces Hystrix events. And we'll see that in a little bit. So let's get into a little bit of code and look at how easy things are to add some of these observers. Like I said, this is considered auto instrumentation. You're not expected to make a whole lot of code changes, but you do need to add, tell your application that you want to use Steeltoe and you want the metrics to be available in a certain format. And that's where you add, for example, this actuators, add metrics actuator will add the /actuator/metrics URL, which allows you to get metrics in a Spring Boot format that Spring Boot admin or task can understand. Or there are a lot of external third-party tooling that people build for their Java applications that should work with the Steeltoe metrics actuator, or the Prometheus actuator that is widely adopted for all metrics tooling. And again, this adds all of these auto collectors and observers for you, which makes it really easy to implement metrics. And you have complete control over which observers you want or not want. And you have these options that will allow you to turn on or off various observers. And not only that, allow you to control some things like which patterns of URL you want to report metrics on, which ones you don't. As far as exporting metrics and traces, here are a few ways that the components export metrics. So obviously with the metrics actuator, you have systems pulling metrics off of the /actuator/metrics, and same with similarly with Prometheus and Trace. Whereas with the Zipkin exporter, it's pushed to the Zipkin server or any server that understands the open format for spans and traces. And so that's how metrics are generated inside your application, collected from the runtime, and then exported via various means into different external systems. So as for how do you add the trace actuator? Again, really simple. You already have your host builder extension method, host builder methods in your program.cs file, and you add just one line for any of these. Or you can also always add all actuators, which will add all of them for you, and you can use configuration to control various aspects of it. With distributed tracing, you have to add the distributed tracing components to the service container and configure it with Zipkin options as shown here with the builder extension. Now, this underlying implementation for this uses the OpenTelemetry implementation, which is not yet GA. It will be shortly. So that brings us to integrations, and we're going to go through how to integrate with various external systems. And we have things like Grafana, which is a dashboarding system. Wavefront is VMware's offering for metrics and even traces. And you have Tanzu, which is the TaaS application service that allows that's a fully managed service for deploying your .NET or any applications in any language. Finally, we have Spring Boot Admin, which is a dashboard tool that will help you manage your applications no matter which cloud you're in. It's completely platform agnostic and open source. So first, let's look at how somebody would integrate with Spring Boot Admin. Now there's a new extension method for, against the app builder that you simply, one line of code, you say register with Spring Boot Admin. And what that does is it hooks into your application lifecycle. And when it starts up, it goes to your configured URL for your Spring Boot Admin server, and you can pass it credentials. And then when the application ends, it will deregister, make another request to it. Really simple, but it makes integrating with Spring Boot Admin Server really simple, and it makes it easy to manage your applications. As far as Tanzu, it hasn't changed if you're familiar with the Steeltoe library. As always, you add the add Cloud Foundry actuators, and it works with obviously any Cloud Foundry. And with Cloud Foundry, though, we used to have what was called the metrics forwarder, and we used to forward metrics in a push model from Steeltoe or any Java application into the metrics system in the cloud. But now that has been deprecated, and therefore we have the metrics registrar. So you go into your CLI and install this metrics registrar plugin as shown in the second line here. And then finally, you register your metrics endpoint. In our case, it understands Prometheus format. So you would pass your Steeltoe app name there, and the path would be the path to the Prometheus actuator. So when you do that, metrics starts flowing into tasks. As for the Grafana, again, since we have Prometheus, we can set up a Prometheus server to scrape metrics off of Steeltoe, and then you're able to query from Grafana the Prometheus database and set up your dashboards. As for the Wavefront, it's a little bit different. You use a open source tool called Telegraph, and Telegraph then scrapes metrics from Steeltoe and then forwards it to Wavefront via a Wavefront proxy. So I have a little example of how that works here. So with that, let's kind of look at how an integration happens. We're going to take a look at a sample app and end up with a really simple dashboard, add a few extension methods, end up with a few simple dashboards, and then we can come back to our presentation. All right, so let me set this up here. So let me share my screen again. For this demo, we're going to look at the fortune teller app. You can find this at the Steeltoe samples repo. Let's see. And it's on the S1P branch if you're interested in taking a look at it. So let's open this app in Visual Studio. And we have two projects inside the solution. One is a fortune teller service and the fortune teller UI. The fortune teller service is basically a simple service to pull a random fortune from an in-memory database. It helps us demonstrate things like circuit breaking when a backend upstream service is not available. And it's not that interesting from the perspective of metrics, but I just wanted to show what was in it. You just basically have it running at port 5000. It's using Eureka, and that's pretty much it for the purpose of this project. Run this. Navigate to the fortunes, and that's pretty much all the service app does. Now let's take a look at the fortune teller UI project. And this is an Angular app. And if you look at it, what's the interesting bits about it is that you have a home controller that responds to slash the index page and has a dependency on fortune service command, which is a hystrix command. And what it basically does is it either gets a value from upstream or it runs its fallback, and you will get this generic, you will have a happy day fortune. So let's go ahead and run the fortune teller UI project. And since the Eureka server is not set up and the upstream backend service is not running, it just returns a generic. Let's go back to Visual Studio and let's take a closer look at the UI project.cs. You can see is this add all actuators. Now what that does is make all of the management endpoints show up. In startup, we also have this ability to view a metric stream in the Netflix dashboard, or we also have this new add hystrix metrics event source, which allows you to watch the hystrix metrics inside Prometheus or any place Prometheus can export it to. So what that does for us is when you go to localhost and then you can navigate to Actuator Prometheus, you can see all these hystrix events. When you add the add all actuators and you enable the appropriate exposure settings, what you also get is now the ability to see all these management endpoints, including thread dump, heap dump, and all these things that help you manage your microservices in the cloud, in fact, in any cloud. All right, so now let's run all of this together inside a Docker Compose. So let's take a look at this observability repository that'll help you run all of these things together. Here we have different samples for Grafana, Wavefront, and so on. Let's take a look at the Wavefront example. And let's start with the Docker Compose. So we have the same project that we were running earlier, the UI, which then has a dependency on the service, and both of them have a dependency on Eureka server. In addition to those, we now have a Wavefront proxy and a Telegraph. And the way it works is Telegraph scrapes the Prometheus endpoint and forwards it to Wavefront proxy, which then forwards it to Wavefront UI. So we can look at our telegraph.conf file, and you can see that it's talking to the Steeltoe app on the Prometheus endpoint. And so that's how it will be able to scrape the metrics. So let's just do a Docker compose up here. See, now we see all of our services are up and running. So now we can take a look at the app again and make sure it's still running. Make sure our backend service is working. And it is up. And you can see it's talking to the backend service now. And now we can take a look at Actuator Prometheus Metrics, and you see it's being populated. So let's now try to set up some of these metrics in Wavefront. So if you have not tried that before, just go to wavefront.com, click on free trial. And since I'm already set up, I'm going to go to, I've already created a few dashboards, but right now I want to create a simple dashboard and view some of these metrics that are flowing from our application. And let's create a line plot. And here in the metrics section here, you can see Steeltoe app metrics, and under there you can see the Prometheus metrics. And you have all these different areas. These are the .NET runtime metrics that are now flowing. You can see the GC heap and thread pool metrics. You also have the Hystrix metrics that are now available, collapse or command pool metrics, or the CLR metrics, and finally you have the HTTP server metrics. So let's take something simple. And
all right. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for this session. We do have to try to stay on schedule as best we can. I do want to point out we have the discussion available to us over in Slack. So that little join the discussion link you see as you're looking at this inside your browser, go ahead and click on that. It'll launch into Slack, and you can continue chatting about this, continue the discussion. But we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and then we will come back with a case study from our good friends at GM.